I'm Sophia. I'm currently a CIPA EMPA student. Simultaneously, I'm an international and Chinese practice lawyer. So I'm going to start by introduce our distinguished moderator here. I think you can read a little bit by yourself. That would be more impressive. So after I read it, I get the conclusion that is Sasha is a rising star in our Columbia University. So we are very proud to have her to moderate this event. Sasha, so without further ado, I will turn the floor to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Do you want to go to the introductory slide? Yeah, there we go. So thank you, Sophia, for including me in this event, and I'll just introduce the speakers quickly. First, we're going to hear from Leslie Go. As Sophia mentioned, Leslie is a senior advisor and former chief technology officer for the World Bank Group. She is a fellow at the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance at the Judge Business School, and she's a senior fellow at the National University of Singapore in Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. She has lots of extensive experience, which again, you can read about on the slide if you want, but we're really looking forward to her insight on lots of different kinds of emerging technologies. Next, we're going to hear from Ranveer Chandra. Ranveer is the chief scientist of Azure Global at Microsoft. He leads research and innovation across different industry verticals at Microsoft Azure. He's been involved in lots of different Microsoft products and is very experienced in computer science. And we're lucky to have him here, excited to hear about how Microsoft is engaging with agriculture. And finally, we're going to hear from Shenyi Lim, who is the Executive Director of Sustainability and Agricultural Impact at PINDUODUO. She is responsible for PINDUODUO's international corporate strategy efforts and innovation in sustainability and agri-tech. And we are really lucky to have her here with us because it's very late where she is right now. Thank you also to the audience for being here today. So the structure is going to be that we'll hear the presentations from the three panelists first, and then there'll be a few minutes at the end for questions. If you have any questions for the panelists during their presentations, please put them in the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And when the presentations are finished, I'll try to select as many as I can to be answered by the panelists. So with that, let's get started with Leslie's presentation. Looking forward to the discussion. Leslie?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that kind introduction. And Sophia, I really appreciate you for organizing this event and also bringing together the great thought leaders from Microsoft and PINDUODUO. What an honor to be here sharing this knowledge event with you. Maybe you can go to the next slide. So I want to take this opportunity to kind of share with you what I've been working on lately. In fact, in the past year, I've been doing a lot of research in agriculture and digital transformation. I've done quite a lot of transformation in government, fintech, healthcare, but agriculture is one area I've not tackled. And I'm not an agriculture expert. However, this is an industry that is ready for that kind of transformation, especially from COVID-19 experience, the disruptions to the food ecosystems, and also around the world, how important agriculture is. So I spent the long Thanksgiving weekend finishing up my first draft of the chapter contribution to the Brookings Institute. The book project is called Breakthrough, the Technologies for Sustainable Development Goals. And it is to raise awareness of technological opportunities to radically alter the trajectory of sustainable development goal outcomes and help foster linkages between policymakers, economists, scientists, engineers, technologists, practitioners, and academics around the world. And the intention is to foster a sense of technology potential sources of optimism and alongside corresponding risks. I'm an eternal optimist, and you see around the ring in the background is the 17 SDG goals. I just wanted to share that with you because that's such an important impact of what we do in various ways where technology can make an impact. So my chapter contribution is about the agriculture sector as an integral part of economic activity and 26% of employment globally. Out of that, 700 million of them live below the poverty line. Hence, strengthening the income of the smallholder farmers will have a significant impact on poverty reduction. And you will hear from Xingyi as well on the programs and the initiative that PINDUODUO is doing that will also address that. And in most countries in East Asia Pacific, where I'm from originally, from Singapore, agriculture is contributing approximately 15% of the GDP of the region and employing close to 40% of the labor force. However, the agriculture industry is still very labor intensive and low income work. So my chapter is going to be focusing on disruptive technologies and innovations in agriculture that enable farmers and agribusiness entrepreneurs to increase their productivity, efficiency, competitiveness, and thereby facilitating access to market, improving nutritional outcome, and enhancing resiliency to climate change agenda as well. So stay tuned to the paper coming up. Actually, it's the book next year by Brookings Institute. So next slide, please. Well, now that we understand we have the potential, the challenge here is about how do we make it happen? So institutional innovation is needed to address adoption and coordination challenges from multiple market failures and challenges. Constraints to adoption and scales include things like asymmetry of information and misalignment of incentives about the use and the value of data sharing, and also farm data access and use, security and safety of data, and the risk of potential misuse is creating distrust to adopt new technology in a rather conservative industry such as agriculture. And that's what draws me to how do we look into ways where we can solve this problem that has been there for decades, if not centuries. So the difficulty is also access to foundational data and lack of data portability that can undermine the competitiveness of the supply to services to farmers and equity in value creation distribution. And also different access to digital infrastructure and data literacy as well that creates the digital divide as we go further in this journey, because we also need to look at the risk, not just the opportunity. So if you go to the next slide, I want to highlight the World Bank report that was published this summer that talks about the experience from Africa, scaling up digital disruptive agriculture technology. It is about institutional innovation that is needed to foster the cooperation across public and private sectors and create a regulatory and policy framework for a dynamic agriculture ecosystem. So the ag tech solutions that span across the entire value chain, ranging from mobile apps to e-commerce platform and market intelligence that bridge the gap between farmers and consumers. A critical component for the success of ag tech business is the effective use of data and analytics. Thus, an agriculture data exchange platform designed with data governance in mind that could help unlock the full potential of digital technology and maximize the data benefits between the private and public community, at the same time addressing the risk and challenges in this space. And so the adoption of digital technology in the agriculture sector will significantly transform the dynamics and encourage a new generations of farmers to emerge around the world. So next, please. Now, I talk about ag tech quite a bit, but what exactly is it? So a way to analyze the digital agriculture ecosystem is to look at the use case that support business model. So in this areas, I want to focus on 5 key areas that has been discussed by quite a few different groups, one of which is by Grow Asia. They talk about farm advisory, which is providing farmers with information on prices, crop planning, weather, pest control, and disease control. Next one is around peer-to-peer lending, access to capital, enable farmers access to credit with low interest rates, especially for smallholder farmers. Traceability is the next other area. First mile data collection to enable traceability of food across the supply chain. And then, of course, the very important thing is around digital marketplace, connecting farmers to buyers and input suppliers. And then the other one is mechanization platform, which is the industrialization of agriculture, on-demand platform to support activities and machineries. So on the next slide, you'll see it's a report from Grow Asia that I kind of highlight some of the analysis in Southeast Asia countries with large smallholder population as a way to categorize the ag tech business in each of the business models that I just mentioned. I think it's worth having a look at. And this is just in one region. There are many other regions that is also driving these kind of innovation. So the last slide, please, I wanted to kind of highlight what our findings is in the whole entire ecosystem that will encourage and also foster that kind of growth opportunity in digital transformation comes down to three key factors: data, innovation, and partnership. That brings multi-stakeholder partnership between private and public sector together and leveraging the institutional innovation to foster cross-fertilization, no pun intended, of knowledge and productive partnerships, and catalyzing data sharing, experimentation, and testing of disruptive technology. And then scaling proven solutions through national level engagement for an efficient, equitable, and environmentally sustainable food system. And this innovation system that will be supported by the institution, framework, and partnership will then support coordination between stakeholders and also enable co-creation and co-innovation, an exchange of ideas, knowledge, data, and solutions on a fit-for-purpose regulatory environment. So with that, I'll pass it over to the next speakers to share more about these environments from the private sector innovation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you and give you a sneak preview of what the chapter is coming up soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm looking forward to reading it when it comes out. So we'll move on to Ranveer.
Let me... Ranveer, would you prefer to share by yourself, or I can share the slides?
It'll be better if I share it, Sophia. So if you could give me permissions. And I'm very excited for Leslie's book. I'm looking forward to that. This is going to be very informative and useful for everyone in this space, working in ag and ag tech. Great, I do have access. Let me know when you see my screen. Okay. Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Ranveer Chandra, and today I'll talk about work that I started at Microsoft. This was back in early 2015 when we started a project called FarmBeats. My background, as Sarah was saying, is not in agriculture, but I did my PhD in computer science from Cornell. But I have been working in different areas related to rural population, be it connectivity, be it energy. And this was a project I started around data-driven agriculture. So why are we trying to solve this problem? Well, the world has a food problem. The world needs more food. The world needs more good food, not just food. You need more nutritious food. And you need to get to this food without harming the planet in a sustainable way. And one of the most promising approaches to get there is that of data-driven agriculture. So when we talk of data-driven agriculture, so before I go there, as just some statistics as to why is this such an important problem. And one of the things that you could do with data-driven agriculture is, for example, you could map every farm in the world with data. Like, for example, what's the soil moisture level 6 inches below the soil? What's the soil nutrient level? What's the soil temperature level? If you could build maps like this, you could enable technologies such as precision agriculture. That is, you could apply inputs where they are needed. You could apply water where it is needed, when it is needed, where it is needed. You could apply pesticide, nutrients, all that, only the amount that is needed and where it is needed. Precision agriculture has been shown, as many of you know, to improve yields. You can take care of plants better. It has been shown to reduce cost because you use less water, you use less pesticide, less nutrients. It's also better for the environment for the same reasons. You're not wasting water. You're not putting in more chemicals that are needed. And in fact, not just this, if you look at the entire food chain, all the way from inputs to farm crop production to food processing, the logistics companies, all the way to the retailers to the consumer, every entity in the entire food value chain would benefit by using data and using that data along with AI to improve their efficiencies. Like a farmer can grow more, can grow it in a sustainable way. Seed companies can make better seeds. You could have food processing companies that could be operating their manufacturing plants better once they start using this data to improve their operations. In fact, the value is much more if you start sharing this data across the different entities in the entire food value chain. For example, just to talk through a few scenarios, you could enable traceability if you start sharing the data across the entire supply chain. You can see how the food was grown, how it was processed, how it was stored. You could also enable techniques that, like the one I talked about with precision agriculture. You could have robotics equipment companies who could get data from the growers, who could get data from the seed companies, from the input companies, to enable much better precision agriculture scenarios. You could enable scenarios around traceability, around sustainability. That is, you could know how the particular food that you're eating was grown. It could also enable scenarios such as outcome-based farming. You could This is one of the latest trends in agriculture, where agriculture companies are looking to not just sell seeds but sell services along with them. Also for R&D, if you start getting the data and you can start sharing the data across the different entities in the food value chain, it could enable better R&D. In fact, there are many more scenarios. These are just few, but once you start looking at the value of data, not just from every entity in the food value chain, but once they start sharing this data, you could start unlocking a lot of new scenarios, a lot of new value in the entire food chain. The thing is, even though the benefits are well known, these technologies around data driven agriculture haven't really taken off. And some of the problems are the ones that Leslie pointed out in her talk. And that one of the biggest reasons is that it's just super hard to get the data from different points in the entire food value chain. And that has been one of the goals of why I started the Farm Beats project at Microsoft. That is, through this work, we are coming up with new ways to acquire large amounts of data from different parts of the food value chain. And then once you bring the data together in the cloud, you can then bring the benefits of artificial intelligence on top of that data to bring in new value, new scenarios, and efficiencies for agriculture. I'll just talk about a few problems that are there in the agriculture space and how we are innovating on different aspects to help address these problems. One of the key reasons data-driven agriculture hasn't really taken off is because of connectivity. That is, the farmer's house has good connectivity to the cloud, but the farm could be a few miles away. Even though connectivity might exist when you plant the seeds, usually when the crops grow, the connectivity is gone. So then the question is, if you don't have good connectivity in the middle of the farm, how will you get data not just from sensors, but from drones, cameras, tractors? How will you stream all of that data to the farmer's house? To address this problem, we use a technology on which I personally have been working on since 2005 called the TV white spaces. What the TV white spaces does is it's a way so what it enables is, imagine if you have a Wi-Fi router that you could access a few miles away. Right now, as many of you know, as soon as you exit the building, the Wi-Fi disappears. With this technology, what we built was a way to take a Wi-Fi signal and put them in empty TV channels. This is over the air TV, the TV you watch using antennas. Like, for example, when you browse through TV on certain channels, you see a transmission. On the other channels, all you see is white noise. What we built was a way in which you could take a Wi-Fi signal and put them in empty TV channels in a way that doesn't interfere with your TV reception in an adjacent channel. And the interesting thing about agriculture is that TV towers are where people are. You'll have TV towers in cities like Seattle, New York City. The farms are away from the cities. So if you turn on a TV in the middle of a farm, most of the channels are just white noise. And the more noisy channels there are, the more available capacity there is. So even if there are 20 TV channels that are just white noise in the middle of a farm, you're talking of a few hundred megabits per second of available capacity in the middle of a farm. So with TV white spaces, you can start gathering large amounts of data. But the other challenge, which I initially mentioned, was if you have to build a map like what you're seeing on the left, like for example, what is the soil moisture 6 inches below the soil throughout the farm. If you have to build an accurate map, you would need a sensor, lots of sensors, say a sensor every 10 meters. But putting a sensor every 10 meters is expensive to deploy, to manage. It will come in the way of the farmer as the farmer does the day-to-day job. So the question we asked was what you're seeing on the last bullet here. Can we build a map like this using very few sensors in the farm? And the way we address this problem is using artificial intelligence. What we do is we intelligently decide locations where you need to put a few sensors. And then what we do is we merge ground sensor data with aerial imagery from drones or satellites. So the way it works is you have a few sensors in the farm, a few places where you have the sensors, where you also have aerial imagery, you use that to train the AI machine learning model. And then you use that machine learning model to predict these values in other parts of the farm. And we wrote a research paper on this where we showed that using this technique, your algorithm can be 3 times more accurate than existing schemes that do not use aerial imagery when building maps like this. So using this, you can see how you can build accurate maps for soil temperature, soil moisture, soil pH, and many other variables as well. One of the challenges that we ran into once you start getting aerial imagery is, well, drones are great, but you won't use drones in from all farms. It will just take a long time to get drone imagery from all farms, in which case you want to rely on satellite data. But if you're looking at satellite data, one of the key problems is that over 70% of satellite imagery has clouds in them. Right now, what people do is if any part of the image is cloudy, you have very sophisticated algorithm to identify clouds, and then you throw away parts of the image which are cloudy. One of the new algorithms we've come up with, new technologies that we built, this was done by my intern from MIT last summer, is we came up with a technology called SpaceEye, which uses a new AI technology, leveraging GANs. This is, I won't get into the details of that, and another satellite that goes around the Earth that has radar in it. Radar, these are radio frequency signals that go through the clouds, and we use that to reconstruct what the image looks like below the clouds. And as you can see on this slide, the image on the left is what you're getting right now, where a lot of the images are cloudy. On the right, even though the images are cloudy, we can see how the farms are changing even below the clouds. Of course, we did this for farms, we did this for the Port of Seattle, we did this for construction sites, and we are super excited about the accuracy that we are getting. We are getting over 95% accuracy in 3 of the 4 seasons, except for winter, where it is close to 90% accuracy. So that was challenge number 2, that is using very few sensors and using artificial intelligence. You can start seeing what's happening in the farm. You can start predicting what's happening in different parts of the farm where you might not have physical sensors. Another key challenge is, well, you could get large amounts of data from the farm to the farmer's house, but the connectivity from the farmer's house to the cloud is weak. Many farmers, they pay for broadband, but all they get is 1 to 3 megabits per second connectivity. In fact, there is a farm in upstate New York where every time there is a snowstorm, there's a high likelihood that his internet connection goes off. So then the challenge is, if you can get large amounts of data, but you can't send this to the cloud, how will you get benefits of all of this data to the farmer? To address this problem, we are leveraging our key insight initially was that many farmers have a PC. If they don't have a PC, we can ship them a PC form factor device. This is an edge device, is what we call, which sits in the farmer's house or office, and it does a lot of compute, a lot of computer vision, a lot of AI sitting in the farmer's house or office. And once it does this, it then sends summaries to the cloud, where we then merge with other data streams to start bringing benefits of AI machine learning to the farmer. And there are many other innovations which I haven't talked about here. In fact, at the event where I had met Sarah earlier this year, I was talking about another technology, which was one of the challenges that Leslie talked about was how expensive it is to get these sensors out there in the farm. How do you make them really low cost? So a new cutting edge innovation that we've developed is a way to use Wi-Fi to sense soil moisture and soil electrical conductivity. And we wrote a paper on this. This got an award at a top tier computer science conference. And the vision there, it's a very, a lot of you are students. So I just try to pitch this research problem where you can start thinking of the business implications of this, where so many farms. So right now, if you have to measure, say, soil moisture or soil EC, these sensors cost a few hundred, if not $1,000 to put in the farm. For many farmers, especially the smallholder farmers in India, in Africa, and Southeast Asia, it's expensive for them to put a sensor which is so expensive. The key insight for us was that these farmers, they might not spend a few $100s buying these expensive sensors, but many of them have smartphones, even if it is an inexpensive smartphone. If you have a smartphone, it has a Wi-Fi chipset in it. And the key IP we developed was a way to measure the time of flight of a Wi-Fi signal. That is, the time it takes for the Wi-Fi signal to go from your phone to any other point depends on the permittivity of the material. So if your soil is moist, it will take longer to traverse the same distance. The challenge, though, is how do you measure this time? It's in nanoseconds. And then this is where we came up with cool new ideas and algorithms around it. But you can envision a future where farmers would just take their phone close to soil and it will tell you properties of the soil on your phone. And this is the kind of vision that we're really excited about, to democratize data-driven agriculture. So there are many other innovations. You can visit the FarmBeats research site and learn about different things that we're doing in that space. So when this work was in research initially, we deployed this in multiple farms, anywhere from half an acre all the way to 9,000 acres. And these are some of the ways in which the growers were using this data. This is one of the things we do is when you put a sensor in the farm, we not only tell you what the sensor values are right now, but we use AI to predict what these values would be up to 5 days in advance. What you're seeing on the right is for soil moisture and soil temperature. If you look at the red bars, the error is less than 10% in these predictions up to 5 days in advance. And the way we built this was we took weather station data from 50 weather stations across Washington state over the last 7 years at 15-minute intervals. We used this data and the predictions from the weather stations using a new AI technique to start making very hyperlocal predictions. So we take that weather station data to build the model. When you put a new sensor in the farm, we start making very hyperlocal predictions. And on the bottom left of the slide, you see a testimonial from a farmer in Eastern Washington. What he wanted to spray chemicals in his farm. This was herbicide to control the weeds. The weather station forecast said that it was going to be 42 degrees. We said it was going to be 31, and it was actually 30 degrees. It was below freezing, and it was good he didn't go and spray the herbicide because otherwise it would have killed his crop. This is another scenario I like talking about. This is in upstate New York. The farmer wanted to know how his cows were doing once they were out in pasture. So we went out, flew the drone, transmitted the data over the white spaces to an edge device, where we then did computer vision and AI and started flagging things within 30 minutes. Things like from left to right, the grass is growing well. There is a water puddle that needs to be fixed before the next planting season. The cows are pooping well, which is also important information for the farmer. This is deep learning on cow poop. This is where the cows are. This is a stray cow that needs to be herded in. All of this within 30 minutes of flying the drone. This is a farm near Microsoft campus where we used to do a lot of demos. In fact, Bill Gates, when he wrote the Gates Notes article, this was the farm he visited. We show the farmer these beautiful pictures. We overlay this with data. For example, here we were able to flag that the bottom left part of the farm was still moist, even though we did not put a sensor over there. This is a soil pH map. After the farmer had applied lime, we were able to flag that the dark parts of the farm, what you're seeing here, are still acidic. This is, again, the barn in upstate New York, where we had cameras streaming data from the barn. We could see how the cows are moving, whether a cow was sick, and so on, all using AI. You can think of that like a baby monitor for cows. So we then, around 2 years back, I moved over to the product side, and we built a product called Azure Farm Beats, where what right now, when people are building these ag tech solutions, you get data from different data sources, you build the data ingestion, data store, and then this is what most existing ag tech companies do. Then they do analytics AI on top. Of course, not everyone builds all of these components, but they build some of these. As part of Azure FarmBeats, we are building some of these components and providing this as part of the product. Like a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, for example, the data ingestion components, like the ones I talked about, are the things that we are building through FarmBeats itself. Everything in white here is in Azure. Everything that you'll see in yellow is built by ISVs and partners. So this is available right now in Azure Marketplace. For people who are using Azure, can go to Azure Marketplace, download Azure FarmBeats, and then see how, and then link up this data with the partners solutions as well. So the kind of scenario that this enables is, once you install Azure FarmBeats, you can then specify a farm, which is basically a polygon, it's a field, like a polygon or a shape file. Then for that field, you can link sensors, you can link drones, these are partner companies, and then you start seeing all of that data in one place. All of this is then integrated with, for example, Azure Notebooks, where you can then start writing AI machine learning code on top of it, like to enable the scenarios that you're seeing on the top left. And these are just some of the companies, some of the partners that we work with. These are sensor partners, drone partners, robot partners, all of these companies who've integrated their solutions with FarmBeats. And as you might have seen in the news, we've announced partnerships with some of the leaders in this space, with Land O'Lakes, where we've announced a partnership around their digital solutions, around connectivity, around sustainability. Similarly with PepsiCo, with USDA, most recently with Corteva Agrosciences, where we are working with them on with leveraging FarmBeats on sustainability solutions. And it's not just about the product. We are also continuing to work on rural broadband solutions, skilling, and sustainability. With, for example, when I talked about TV white spaces, it's one component which is part of a broader initiative at Microsoft called the Airband Initiative, where what we are doing is we are partnering with ISPs, with government agencies, with other nonprofits as well, to bring broadband to rural America, actually rural parts of the world. Then we also, earlier this year, we made a big sustainability commitment, for example, around carbon. Microsoft has pledged to be carbon negative by 2030. When we're thinking of carbon negative, we are putting back more carbon than the amount we generate. And as you can imagine, the way we expect to get there is, part of it would be by reducing our own emissions, but that's not enough. We'll also have to buy carbon credits and look at ways in which you can put carbon back into soil. The interesting thing is, one of the ways in which you can put carbon back into soil is through agriculture, by using the right agricultural practices. And this is where we are working with different agricultural companies to figure out how are the ways in which you can quantify the amount of carbon that is put into soil, and incentivize growers to adopt the right agricultural practices so that more carbon is put into soil and the amount of emissions are reduced. One of the other work we are doing around our CSR initiative through Microsoft Philanthropies is we are working with the Future Farmers of America, with FFA, on enabling skilling of the rural population. We partnered with the FFA high school chapters, and we've created a FarmBeat student kit, which we're giving out to these high school chapters. We work with them on creating a high school curriculum. And the goal here is that the future farmers, these students, even when they are young, they learn about data, they learn about AI, they learn about how data and AI can help agriculture, so that they can start adopting all of these technologies as part of the farming solutions. And most recently, one of the work we did was with Purdue University on the supply chain side, where we were able to get data from different data sources along the entire food value chain and then show it in a Power BI dashboard, where we then start using AI to start flagging risks in food production in different states for different types of commodities. I know I rushed through all of these, but I'm happy to dig deeper. And to conclude, I wanted to thank a lot of the partners and companies that we are continuing to work on and continuing to innovate with as we try to address this hard world food problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranveer. I think any presentation that mentions deep learning on cow poop has really stolen the show for the day. So thanks. And we're going to move on to Xinyi now. And as a reminder, if you have questions, some people have, but please put them in the chat if you have any questions for after the presentations.
Sure. Would you guys be sharing the slides on your end, or do you want me to share on my screen?
I can share. If you can share by yourself, it would be good. But if you,
Because mine doesn't have any animation, it's like quite basic. So yeah. So yeah, I think it is tough to top AI deep learning on cow poop. But I thought it was really cool, like some of the initiatives that Ranveer was sharing, right? I think getting young farmers involved and familiar with digital technologies from an early age, that's something that I think is a fantastic idea, right? As I'll go on to share later on in my slides, we do also do a fair bit of work at PINDUODUO around training farmers. So I think certainly the development of human capital is something that we think is very important. And thanks also to Sophia and also Leslie for organizing and laying out sort of the groundwork on the state of digital agriculture today. So without further ado, I'll just jump into my slides. So I'll talk about how PINDUODUO as an e-commerce platform is helping to empower farmers. So if we go on to the next slide, just to give you a sense of who is PINDUODUO, right? So we are China's second largest e-commerce platform in terms of users. So we were founded in October 2015, and in the span of 5 years, we've accumulated an annual active buyer base of 731 million. So this is actually pretty similar in size to the industry number one. So we've grown very quickly. We have a very engaged user base. So our monthly active users are about 643 million. And then our sort of GMV in US dollar terms. So think about this as just in terms of the transaction, right? The scale, the volume of things that are getting sold on our platform. So on the last 12-month basis, it was about $200 billion for the quarter ending in September. And if you look at the parcels flying around in China every day, 1 out of every 3 parcels that you see in China today is being contributed by orders on PINDUODUO. So yeah, next slide, please. I think one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is that we are actually the largest online agriculture platform in China as well. So that's kind of why I'm here today talking about digital ag. So for us last year in 2019, we sold 136 billion RMB worth of agricultural products. So in US dollar terms, that's roughly about $20 billion, right? Just shy of $20 billion. So in terms of the agricultural merchants on our platform, right, we have about 600,000 of them, right, and they're selling to our broad buyer base, right? So of that 700 million people, well, last year it was more like 500 million plus, right? So about 40 to 50% of the people on our platform buy agricultural goods. So it is definitely something that is a very popular category that a lot of people associate PINDUODUO with. So I won't go through like the further details, but suffice to say, we do move a lot of agricultural products, right? And then on to the next slide. I think a common question that some people might have is, for agricultural goods, why isn't it being sold online already, right? So Sophia, if we go to the next slide, there are some things that we do that helps to address certain issues specific to agricultural products better. So if you think about just e-commerce, right, your shopping experience on Amazon today or whatever it is, you go in and you buy, whatever you want to get. Sophia goes in, she places her own orders, and it's all a very solitary experience. It's happening by yourself, and then you wait, right? So maybe you wait like 2-3 days for your parcel to reach you. Now, when it comes to agricultural goods, one of the nuances is that for the farmer, they need to have a lot more certainty, right? Because there's a certain shelf life for those agricultural products. So that means that oftentimes the farmer, even though they know that they should be fetching a higher price for the products, they need to move the volume, right? So they need the certainty that they can move their volumes in a narrow window of time when the product is still good, and they're willing to just take whatever cash they can have. So what our model does is basically do a volume aggregation for the farmers online. So think about it as, you know, when you go into Costco today, right, you might get some really good savings on mayonnaise or, you know, peanut butter or whatever it may be. But that's because you're buying like a super huge, like jumbo tub, right? But on Pinduoduo, because we're an online platform, we don't really need to force everybody to buy like jumbo tubs of mayonnaise or peanut butter to have the aggregation. If I can actually use, you know, a recommendation engine, right, a recommendation platform whereby users come together, right, and all buy the same thing in a short period of time, I can guarantee that volume, right, that I mentioned earlier, which is important to farmers. So how does this work? On Pinduoduo, we have this thing called the team purchase. So this notion is basically when you buy on the platform, you can enjoy a lower price if you're buying as part of a team. So it's a bit hard to see here on the screen, but you can see on the middle screenshot, there's kind of like two things at the bottom. There's like a pink thing and a red rectangle. So those two are prices, right? So actually in terms of the prices, you know, the pink rectangle is what you would be paying as an individual consumer, right? And then the red one is actually a lower price. So in this specific example, it's 1480 and 1380, right? So you would be able to enjoy the 1380 price if you're part of a team purchase. So you can actually start up the purchase and then send on an invitation to your friends, to your family, your social network, through WeChat, through QQ, etc. And if they join in your team purchase within 24 hours, your team purchase is successful, right? So you can both enjoy the pairs for 1380 instead of buying it separately at 1480. So what that means is that, you know, somebody who maybe wanted to buy pairs, you know, he could also be helping us pull in a customer who would have otherwise bought maybe bananas or, you know, pineapples like next week, right? So it's aggregating onto the same SKU in a short period of time. This generates a large volume of orders for the farmers, and the farmers, you know, some of them, they are, say, in a co-op, that could be just one more layer where, you know, someone who is taking care of the business would be packaging, doing the quality control. They would be the ones who then ship on to the consumer. But effectively, what this does is you're cutting out a lot of the layers of distribution, right? So effectively, the farmer is able to enjoy a higher price while the consumer is still, you know, saving money, right? They're still getting good value. So the next slide will actually go into a bit more detail on how that works. So this is a case study of garlic. So as you can see, right, the conventional path is kind of the top arch, right? So it's 1 RMB for half a kilogram at the farm gate. But after it passes through like the wholesaler, right, the distributors, all the way to the supermarket, the consumer, right, maybe in Shanghai or Beijing is paying like 8 RMB for half a kilogram of garlic. So what we're actually enabling the farmer to do is, you know, the farmer, if they just knew who those consumers were, who those people who wanted their garlic were, they could be shipping directly to these consumers through our platform and pricing it at, for instance, 2 RMB for half a kilogram. So to the consumer, it's a no-brainer, right? Because you're paying, you know, a quarter of what you used to pay. Now the farmer, right, they are also able to enjoy a higher net income, right? So taking into account the shipping costs as well as some packaging, they are still netting about 1.3 per half a kilogram. So it's still 30% improvement than what they would have had otherwise, right? So this is something that I think we're very fortunate that, you know, in China, logistics is also fairly developed, right? The parcel cost is quite low, right? So the farmers are able to just tap on to the third-party logistics providers directly and then, you know, arrange for that pickup. So on to the next slide, you know, apart from just the better economics to the farmer, the importance of the e-commerce platform is also that it helps to create demand, right? So sometimes, right, in many industries, actually, I don't know if we've got any sort of like MBA types here, right? You know that there's always this inventory management issue, right? So you've produced something that you think should be a hit product, but sadly, not that many people really want it, or everybody wants it in red, nobody really wants it in purple, right? So for agricultural goods, there are some such situations as well, right? Some years people see like, oh, this crop sold really well, right? My neighbor selling that crop made a lot of money, maybe I should change, right? But by the time, right, they change and they produce the crop, the market may have swung into oversupply, right? So you're stuck with a lot of that produce that is effectively your full year's effort and investment plowed into it. So what we're able to do as an e-commerce platform is also to help funnel traffic, right? To help create demand. Because as I mentioned earlier, people's interests or their demand can be fungible, right? So in my previous example, right, maybe, I wanted to have pears, but Sophia, maybe she wanted like bananas or pineapples. But if I send her the link and say like, hey, look, we can both save some money if we buy pears together, maybe she'll decide like, oh, okay, sure, I'll buy pears, right? So maybe in this case, right, I could be someone who is quite influential in my little friendship circle, right? When I share things with my friends, they pay attention, right? Especially when it comes to food, I'm a big foodie. And so the platform actually in our sort of analysis of users, we're able to tag, right, each user with different sort of profiles. So we can identify who is maybe an influencer when it comes to fresh produce. And so in this example, we had this South American root vegetable called yacon, which actually, was in oversupply, right? It was introduced to Yunnan, the lower income farmers embraced it because it's very easy to grow, relatively cheap to grow, but then there wasn't that much demand in the market. So what we were able to do is that we actually sort of advise the farmers like, hey, maybe you should market this as a health food, right? Because it does actually have a very low GI. It actually is good for people who want to lose weight. And then we can also identify who are the users who would be most likely to convert, right? And then when they convert, it would also show up in the recommendation feed of their friends, right? So, people who bought, other fruits or other produce with that person, they would suddenly start to see like, oh, what is this strange yacon, right? What is this strange thing? Oh, but my friend gave a good review, so maybe I should try it. So we were able to change this, situation from oversupply to one whereby, they were actually able to sell out all of their yacon, and some of the farmers actually decided to expand the acreage that was being covered by the crop. So that's really a powerful example of how, as an e-commerce platform, we can influence what people are seeing. We can help to create demand. And I have a later example as well, talking about COVID-19, where this really came into play, right? Because again, we can prioritize the things that are in oversupply that urgently need to be bought. And for most people, right, if you just see like, oh, okay, it's this product, it's a good price, they might they'll just convert, right? They wouldn't really fuss about, I want to have the potatoes from this place or that place. So that's kind of the underlying logic on the platform. If we go on to the next slide, I'll just wrap up with the final kind of like benefit to farmers that we bring. So the other aspect is also consumer insights. So some people may be a bit surprised that you need consumer insights for agricultural goods, but it's true, right? Same for like any manufactured product. You do actually want to tailor your product a bit more to what consumers actually want. So it could be in terms of like the price point, in terms of the right SKU, right? Should it be sold in a 500-gram bag, or should it be actually like a 2-kilogram box, but at a lower price per 100-gram? So these are actually data, right, that we can collect from the 700 million buyers on our platform, and we can actually feed it upstream to guide the farmers on what we're seeing, right? So, okay, if you're growing coffee, we're seeing that there's this kind of demand. So maybe you should be considering shifting to these kind of beans. Same thing with tea producers, right? So we also have, partnered with tea producers from this region in the southern part of China that is a big tea producing hub. And we basically gave them some insights, right? Like, okay, you know, on our platform for tea that is, you know, of a certain grade, of a certain variety, it tends to transact within this range of price. You know, the buyer base, these are maybe younger people, maybe they're singles. So it would be really good if you made them in like little packets, right? Like single, you know, instance, you know, single serve rather than like a big sort of cake, right? Which is more suitable for like a family size consumption. So on the next slide, I'll just go on to talk about kind of what we're doing on the human capital front, since that's something that, you know, I think dovetails really nicely with what Ranveer shared earlier with the future farmers. So one thing that we've done is also train up a lot of these so-called new farmers in China. So we have this program called PINDUODUO University. And, you know, since inception, we've actually been doing these training courses, both online as well as offline, whereby we help to train some of these younger folks, right, who maybe, you know, they're a bit more educated and they want to go back to their hometowns from the big cities. They want to be entrepreneurs, but they're not really sure how to start. Right. So think about it as kind of like a crash course in e-commerce, right? So we teach them basics of e-commerce, right? Basics of running a business, bookkeeping, stuff like that. So that these people with maybe more of like a farming background or just, you know, a non-e-commerce background can transform and become sort of entrepreneurs on PINDUODUO. Right, so they effectively end up setting up stores on our platform. They sell different kinds of agricultural produce, and they're also very important in helping to mobilize the rest of their local community, right? Because if you think about it, right, you know, your typical image of a farm in some remote part of China, very elderly farmers, maybe not terribly educated. How do you, you know, tell them like, hey, you know, do you want to start selling your stuff online? Right, most of them would be a bit bewildered. They'll be like, oh, how does this work, right? Like, are you sure people want to buy my stuff, right? So you kind of need the new farmers to serve as a bridge between sort of the traditional farmers and the consumers. So that's what we've been doing on sort of the human capital development front. So we go on to the next slide. So I'll talk about PINDUODUO Farms. So this is specifically a CSR project that we've done at PINDUODUO. We work together with the local governments as well as some agronomic research institutes in a kind of a tripartite relationship. So we, you know, are the sponsor of these pilot farms. So we are working with the Yunnan provincial government as well as the local governments in the province, in particular those that are designated as impoverished counties, so below the national poverty line. So we provide the financial support and the e-commerce related training, the traffic, right, enabling them to sell things, make their things visible to users on our platform. The local governments will provide the operational support. So they'll work with us, with the local farmers, to get them on board to implement these programs that are developed by the agronomic research institutes. So there, you know, these are people who are agronomic experts. They may focus on just specific crops, like say tropical crops, and they would evaluate on each pilot farm kind of what is their baseline situation, what crop might they be better suited to grow. Or, you know, maybe the crop is correct, but the method in which they're growing it is not the most optimal. So they would be the ones kind of prescribing, you know, what is the technical improvement to be making. So if you go on to the next slide, so this is an example of what we did in one part of Yunnan. So it's a citrus growing area. And basically the agronomic expert recommended Israeli drip irrigation. And, you know, drip irrigation as a technology, it is fairly old technology, I would say, right? The Israelis developed it way back in like, I think the 50s or the 60s. But in this, you know, lower income, more impoverished part of Yunnan, it was actually the first time, right, that it had been introduced to that region. So the technical experts were able to sort of demonstrate to the farmers like, okay, this is how you set it up, right? We sort of provided the starter funds, which enabled the farmers in the area to pull together. So we formed a cooperative, right? So, you know, the farmers now have one big plot of land where you can have the irrigation, where they can all work together to implement the project. And the end result is that actually for the orange trees that are being grown, they use 15% less fertilizer. they require 30% less labor, and they can also increase the farmer earnings quite meaningfully, right, by about 800 to 1500 RMB per sort of 1/6 an acre. So on to the next slide, please. So this is just highlighting kind of, some of the points that I made earlier, how it really came to the fore during COVID-19. So when we had the disruptions to the offline distribution network, right, a lot of the consumers who typically bought their fruit, their fresh produce offline, they weren't able to do it. So everybody suddenly started to move online. And so I think it's also important to think about, the role of highly scaled tech platforms, right, in absorbing that demand, being able to direct it, right? So we kind of play like traffic police in a way. And so on one hand, we have a lot of demand now coming, looking for fresh produce. On the other hand, we also knew there was a lot of supply stuck kind of offline. And how were we able to match that, right? So we expedited the moving of those listings, right? We helped to create some of those listings. We put the product online. And like I mentioned earlier, we prioritized the things that were sort of, in very sort of desperate need for sales, right? So they've got a huge amount, it's going bad soon, etc. We could actually push those listings up front and make it more visible to more users on our platform. And then at the same time, we also did some live streams using community leaders, which generated more excitement. Again, it's COVID lockdown, you've got nothing to do, you're sitting home in your pajamas, why not watch some live streaming, right? So you'd be surprised, right? There's millions of people who would watch people talk about oranges, right? And peel oranges and eat them and tell you like, so juicy, oh, it's so good, right? Okay, so that really helped to drum up a lot of sales. And so we were able to move almost like 800,000 metric tons of produce in like the span between February and mid-August. So that's kind of like the scale at which we're operating. Onto the next slide, please. And this is just another example on the upstream side. So what I mentioned earlier is downstream, right? So how are we able to move the produce to the consumers? On the upstream, it's also very important, right? Because, once the farmers sell the stuff, they've got to be planning for the next season, right? They have to plant. So that was also very much impacted by the COVID lockdowns because they didn't really have access to the inputs, right? Which they would usually buy offline in a fair somewhere. So online, they could now procure things like seeds, fertilizers, crop protection, machinery even, and have it delivered right to their village. So there was an arrangement with the government to have green lanes for these kind of agricultural inputs. And at the same time, we also worked with agricultural experts to do live streaming. So basically the farmers could also receive instruction, right, get some information and prepare themselves, but digitally and, with all the safe distancing and good stuff. Okay, so I think that should be close to the end. So in summary, I think I'll leave you to read through the details here because I know we're a bit tight on time. But really, I think it's just want to emphasize how an e-commerce platform, right? It might seem like, hey, we're just selling stuff, right? It's actually plays a very important role in providing an alternative route to market for farmers. It can increase the market that they are able to address, not just a local thing, but it becomes a nationwide thing. At the same time, because the information we have from the consumer end is digitized, we can also funnel that upstream, right? And let the farmers know in closer to real time than say like a retailer, like a supermarket would, what people are looking for, what people want to buy, so they can then plan for what they should be trying to sell people in the next growing season. So with that, I'll hand it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Shinyi. And I was really excited to learn about PINDUODUO and hope to see innovations like that in other countries soon. So we're going to stay on just a few minutes extra to have some questions. We've gotten some great ones from the audience. But selfishly, I'm going to start with one that I have. Leslie and Ranveer both mentioned access to technologies, and I'm sure with e-commerce, trying to reach everyone is important. And my question is that gender inequality in the food system is a massive issue, especially in developing countries. And I'd like to ask how we can ensure that women are involved both in the development of digital technologies and also making sure that digital technologies are able to be accessed by female farmers in the same manner as their male counterparts.
Great question. So I'll start with that, and maybe Ranveer can chime in as well. Thank you so much for raising the topic that's very close and dear to my heart. I'm a personal advocate of women in technology, and a lot of things I do is towards that cause, and providing diversity, inclusion, and gender balance. And looking at agriculture, maybe I'll put a plug. In January, the World Bank is actually going to be hosting an event that I'm going to help organize on women, especially on gender dimension for agriculture. So I'd love to crowdsource from this community. If you know of any great agriculture, agri-tech entrepreneurs that would be great to showcase in our session, I would love to kind of take in some of the ideas and input, because one of the things that we want to highlight is how can we bring about opportunity for the other half of the population around the world. And the COVID-19 actually shows how women are unfortunately more impacted in many ways than the male counterparts. And so in many ways in agriculture, that is also one area that we're looking into. There is opportunity for women to participate in the ecosystem, be it access to finance, access to technology, looking at new ways for transforming agriculture methods. So I think I would say stay tuned for our January event at the World Bank. I work closely with my colleagues in agriculture, global practice. So I didn't mention it earlier more strongly. The work that I'm doing has a lot of sponsorship and also support and forward-looking leadership from the World Bank Agriculture Global Practice that has been looking at this problem holistically and globally, and how do we come up with new approach to solve this problem. So that's why I'm bringing the lens from a technology, but also from a policy side. How do we help government create these institutional innovation engine behind this to replicate success from not just one country, but one region to another region, so we can cross-learn. And I use the word cross-pollination very tongue-in-cheek, but in reality, it's an important one. So looking at women as a dimension to help them raise their opportunity and also access to the digital capabilities. So I don't know whether Ranveer would like to chime in as well. Thank you for the question, sir.
Yeah, and great point, Leslie. You raised really good points. And this is something which is top of our mind, especially the access to technology in the emerging markets. And I think that's what you in particular, that there is such a big disparity. In fact, most recently, I was writing a paper, and even for connectivity, you would think that number of people connected would be the same, irrespective of gender. But the problem is much more severe, even as basic a need as connectivity. The number of women connected, disconnected is far more, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, than men. So what this means is when we are thinking of access to technology, we have to start thinking of the very basic layer that they might not even be connected to the internet. So how do we even reach out to them? And this is a very hard problem. As Leslie mentioned, it's a technology problem, it's a policy problem, and all of us need to put our minds together to come up with solutions to address that.
Thank you. It's a really difficult topic that is obviously going to need a lot of innovation in the coming years to make a sustainable system, not only for the planet, but for all the people who are involved in the industry. I'd like to move on to some questions that we got from the audience. So one of them, Shinyi touched on how PINDUODUO has helped respond to COVID-19. And I guess just as a more general question, how can digital technology and data help agriculture become more resilient to future systemic shocks and unprecedented crises? Can we predict it, and how can we rapidly respond?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually for PINDUODUO, we start out as just a platform, right, that's connecting farmers with consumers. And so I think just in exploring that piece, there's still a lot that we can do, right? So I mentioned a little bit about it earlier, whereby, to the extent that we can have a better sense of consumer needs, we can do that forecasting and we can relay that information upstream, right? So I saw in the chat there were some questions about wastage. So certainly, we do expect that we can reduce wastage that way, right? Because people are producing more to what the market actually wants. And we're also looking at ways in which we can develop different systems for logistics, right, or for fulfillment, such that you don't necessarily have to wait 2 to 4 days for the fresh produce to reach you. It could maybe be sort of picked up by yourself at a local convenience store, right? So you would still be placing the orders online. It's just that you do the last mile fulfillment, right? So maybe you walk 100 meters from your apartment and you go pick up the parcel yourself, but you save a lot of that logistics cost for the last mile, right? Because the last mile tends to be the most expensive piece of logistics, right? So you know that you can cut that out. So that actually creates some different modalities, right? So people can buy things just through regular traditional retailers. You can buy it through online. You can buy it through this kind of hybrid model of ours. And then I think in future, right, as we look to increasing food productivity through agri-tech, right, that's something that, we've had some chats with various players in the industry as well. We're definitely very keen to leverage our access to farmers to help to introduce more of these technologies. So we are actually organizing a smart agri competition in China. So this is actually, getting AI talent to compete against traditional farmers by growing strawberries, right, and doing it entirely remotely. So if this technology actually gets proven out, like, okay, for a certain cost, you can get so much more in return, and we can help to spread that sort of technology, right? Make it more known, make it more penetrated to different farmers. Potentially, you're opening up a future where you don't necessarily need that many people all packed on a farm. Because I think if you look at what happened in the US, right, with some of the farms, especially around like the harvest time, when you have a lot of labor that is working in close proximity, right? So in future, if you have another sort of like pandemic wave, if you have things that can be automated, right? It's just a smart system that is administering the water or the nutrients. You potentially have robotic arms doing the picking. You can definitely minimize, I think, the amount of labor that you would potentially need in such a situation. So I think definitely we're interested in, working together with partners to bring in more of these upstream technologies to improve the efficiency of farming in China.
Yeah, and Shini touched upon most of the things that PINDUODUO is leading in a lot of this work in China, and we are learning a lot from what they're doing. On our side, and I think there's one of the questions in the chat as well on the distribution side, what are we doing? So some of the things we're trying to do in this space is to again bring all of this data together from different entities in the entire supply chain in one place, enabling secure sharing of the data to increase visibility in the entire supply chain. So this work that I briefly mentioned in the presentation, this work we just did with Purdue University. So Professor Jason Lusk, he's the head of AgEcon at Purdue. He front-ended most of this work, where for COVID, we were looking at different data sources from COVID spread to the commodities and which commodities are grown where to come up with a metric for different commodities. You could look at on this dashboard for different commodities, where is it most likely to get affected? So for example, in some cases, we were able to flag that, for example, the meat packing plant in Washington State was going to close a week in advance. So if these are the kind of things you can start doing by gathering all of this data in one place and applying AI to build these predictive models. Now, of course, this was an easier problem because we were just looking at the US. But if you look at the entire food chain, it's the entire world is so interconnected with all with the food trade and so on, and the trade issues, especially that got affected too during COVID. We need to then come up with this kind of a dashboard for the entire world where we can go to a single place and see for different commodities how is the food supply going to be affected in different parts of the world, both because of trade, because of COVID, because of pests and all of this. And I think that's the future. It will happen, and we all have to take steps in that direction by getting data, by storing data, by starting to leverage some of the data science, some of the AI machine learning tools to start providing more visibility into the entire food chain.
Great, and I think we have time for one more question, which is a little more future thinking. Well, they're all future thinking, but we have an audience member who's really interested in the use of drones and ag tech. And in your eyes, what are the creative or exciting developments in drone usage in agriculture?
I could start. We're using drones for a lot of stuff, but drones, of course, for scouting is one of the immediate solutions. We call this. Whenever we think of the different use cases of any technology, we think of it in terms of H1, H2, H3. That's Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3, which would be much further ahead. Horizon 1 is what's happening right now. People are using it for scouting, for seeing what might be happening in different parts of the farm. In fact, there is a farmer, I briefly talked about him in the presentation, in Eastern Washington. He farms 9,000 acres spread over 45 miles. And earlier, he would have to go walk the entire farm. Now he just uses his drone to get an image of different parts of the farm, what's going on there. In Horizon 2, what we're looking at is not just for scouting, but also for application of inputs. And Shini touched a little bit upon this as well, where you could apply pesticide or chemicals in different parts of the farm based without actually. Right now, what a farmer has to do is they have to take the tractor out if they have to do any sort of application. With this grower, for example, he knows based on scouting where he needs to do what. He would just fly his drone, line up, it just goes straight in that direction, applies it where it is needed, and comes back. It's better in every metric. It's sustainable, it saves him money and all that. And thinking a bit more further ahead in the for food, the role of drones we believe is in last mile delivery, where again Shini talked about how that is the most expensive part of getting any package to the consumer's house, to the customer's house. Where in the last mile delivery space, you could use drones to be much more efficient to get the package, either it is food or drugs or anything else, to the customer in a very short amount of time. But there is lots of potential in this space. Of course, this is the vision. Underlying that, you have to solve a lot of hard problems, some of which people have addressed, but there are a lot of open problems in this space. So if there are students here, well, there's a huge opportunity to do lots of cool, amazing innovation and make real impact.
Leslie or Shini, do you want to chime in before we wrap up on drones?
So I don't really have very much to add to Ranveer's kind of comprehensive framework. I would just say that I think as with all kinds of new technologies, the role of the government is also quite important. So I think when people look at the agri-tech landscape in China, the usage of drones definitely is more than in some of the other countries, right? But then some of the things that are quite common, I would say, in the US farming landscape, for instance, the use of like sensors, right, of having very detailed maps of the farm, that's something that's actually lacking with the traditional Chinese farmers, right? And sometimes it's also because of the size of the farm. So there are some of these things that sometimes you need government stimulus or government policy to help to steer, right? So I think in the instance with drones, right, there were some subsidies, right, that were given out by the government. So that actually encouraged or sort of made more farmers aware of, oh yeah, I can use this thing to spray pesticides. Oh, that's so great, right? So that's a very real example coming from China. Yeah.
And then from my part, I think Ranveer covers a great extent on all the possibilities and the promises of drone and all the other new technology. As the technologies, I love to play with the different tools, but I also work very closely in the emerging market where there's some constraints, and Ranveer talked about them before, and Xingyi mentioned some of it as well. So I think what I want to emphasize and kind of close this session, I know we ran a little over on time, but it's such a rich conversation, is that how COVID is a catalyst for deepening the digitalization journey in the food system and the way we look at this problem space. And perhaps this is a great opportunity for what we call the Great Reset Initiative that World Economic Forum had so wisely coined, that we have a window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and see how we can reset the world that we live in to create a healthier, more equitable, and sustainable future that is prosperous for all, bringing the private sector and the public sector together and collaborate and co-create this new world and what we call Build Back Better. so that it's resilient, inclusive, and sustainable for all. So I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and also for your great question in this community. Let's hope that we can continue collaborating and keep each other posted of the new ideas that we can take it forward to different parts of the world, especially in some of the challenging areas where there are vulnerable populations looking for creative solutions. So for those of you who are out there with great ideas, let's come together and work for move forward in this brave new world. Thank you so much.
Definitely, and I'd like to also just point out, Leslie's been sharing some wonderful resources in the chat if you'd like to continue reading and hopefully participate in future discussions. So with that, I think, Sophia, let's wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you.